So today we're talking about task one. Our focus is on the task one resources. And as I mentioned earlier, task one, task two, task three are all interrelated. So you want to make sure you got task one done correctly because task two and task three depend on it. In your binder, hopefully you're looking at your handbook, the making good choices, the understanding academic language, and the understanding rubric level progressions. And then there are those templates that work with that. We're not going to cover all of these, but I just want you to know that if you go back and look at this, that you've got those specific pieces. So your focus here is task one, but as you heard me already say today, plan ahead for task two and task three. You've got to come up with a central focus. You heard one of the tips earlier, get to a specific objective and make sure you're teaching that. The lesson plans determine what you will film, which is task two. And the assessment you use will determine the student work you collect, which is task three. So that's why you got to make sure you think through the whole thing. And that's the other reason you read that whole handbook if you haven't already. And most of us, I know that I've read that handbook at least 3 times already, and I would expect that you're doing the same thing. So task two, you teach the lessons, you film the lessons. You want to make sure you review task two commentary, document before filming. That's on the agenda. It's also in your digital organizer, all that filming stuff. Make sure you read that before you start doing that stuff, the task two. And then of course, task three is analyzing and reflecting on your lessons, and then identifying and discussing an assessment. In each one of these sections, there's that commentary, and you can start writing some of that commentary, but you got to get all these other pieces in place before you do that. In your edTPA handbook on page 70, there is this diagram. And I think this diagram gives you a good overview. As you've heard me say in the past, I know that I'm a visual learner. So I really appreciate visuals that people put together. And so I'm sharing it with all of you, because as you think about task one, or rethink about it if you're already into it, you've got to start with that box at the very top. What is the overarching big idea? What is the central focus? And you can see in this example, they're saying, for example, it might be persuasive writing. What's the essential literacy strategy that you're going to use? Are you going to focus on comprehending or composing? And think about how you will teach those things. So in this case, they give the example of constructing an argument or an evidence to support an argument. Then you talk about the related skills and how they're related to the standards and lesson objectives and the language functions. So that's the overall piece. And this is the critical piece of task one, really, is naming these things and knowing what these are. That you should know this stuff so well that I could wake you up in the middle of the night and you could say, I'm working on objective such and such, and this is the literacy strategy I'm working on. That's how well you should know this. So whatever you need to do to know it that well, then that guarantees that when you teach it, you will hit those right pieces for the filming overall. And again, if you look in your handbook, page 70, that's where this shows. The central focus is mentioned in task 4, but it really plays into greater importance in task 1. So if you look at rubric level progressions, Appendix A, pages 57 to 63, you're going to find this information. The rubrics are really important, as you heard people say earlier. So you're identifying one essential literacy strategy. And again, it's either reading comprehension or composing. It's telling you. And again, you know, sometimes in teaching, you can be creative, but with edTPA, you don't want to be creative. You want to do exactly what it asks you to do and do it in the way that they're asking you to do it. Because overall, the edTPA process is just good teaching. And even though good teaching doesn't mean you're going to do it in this depth every time you do a lesson, it's important that you go through it and that you understand all these aspects, because all of it will come in handy in your teaching. So remember, you're going to teach one strategy for 3 to 5 lessons. And that one strategy you're using should be really clear in those lessons. You're going to analyze the skills. You don't have to teach all the skills, but you have to analyze them. You might teach the same or different skills in each lesson, but the essential literacy strategy stays the same for all lessons. I would strongly encourage you to use the Common Core standards and the ELD standards as your main standards you're using. And talk to your cooperating teacher because they can talk about teaching to standards and objectives because most lessons are that way. So that's an important resource. Whatever you put together for task 1, I would run that by your cooperating teacher for sure. And I'd run it by one other person before you move it all forward, because again, it's critical for moving forward after task 1. So now I'm talking a little bit about that document, which is called Understanding Academic Language. There's only 3 pages in that document, but it packs a lot of important information. It talks about the language demands and the language function and understanding the differences of those different things that are there. And again, you can see the references that are here and that you apply those as you go through. Layla asks, are we analyzing the same students from task 4 in tasks 1 to 3? There's nothing that says you can't. So they could be the same students. At least I don't read anything that says it can't be the same students. And if anybody reads differently, let us know. So that's a good point. So if you've already worked with the students in task 4, they're going to be more primed to work with you in task 1, right? Or task 2, or the work you collect from them in task 3. In the handbook, page 16, it talks about language function. And it gives you all these different words of things to think about. You're not doing all of these. You're going to pick one of these, right? But as you do your lessons, you call these out, then that becomes evidence in your filming of what's going on. Again, you're identifying a key learning task. Letter C, you can see additional language demands. And as Travis pointed out, you can see vocabulary has these dots under it and syntax has these dots. On the digital version, you click on that and it tells you exactly what it is. So on this one, go check out the digital version because it gives you all the background information on that as well. And then here's the understanding academic language. Page 2, it tells you the functions and all those pieces, how to compare and contrast, all those, and the examples are listed here as well, the definitions, all of those are here. Now, let's say you get to this page and you're going, I don't understand the syntax stuff. Well, then that's your clue to yourself to go find out about syntax or talk to your cooperating teacher or somebody else, or you're not sure about comparing or narrative text, or if there's some part on one of these pages that you don't get that you're going to have to apply, you need to understand it on the front end if you're going to write it in the commentary in the back end. So again, maybe you don't know what onomatopoeia is. Well, that's an example, but you know, it'd be okay to look that up now so you have an idea of what it is, even if you don't use it, right? They don't put things in here for no reason. That's the other thing. And what I know about edTPA, having gone through it many times now or gone through the reading, is it is really well, I'll just say this, it's well put together and it makes sense. It's well organized. So follow what they tell you to do. So task 1, you want to start by reading and understanding one of your Common Core standards from ELA that you're going to use for this, right? And that you want to see how it fits with the plan language supports and how that all aligns together. And they gave you an example here. Students will analyze character traits. And then it tells you the types of things you might do with that. Again, in the other document, Making Good Choices on page 15, it talks about the instructional supports for the identified language demands. And I put that arrow there because it says to you, here's a suggestion. Help you plan your language supports is to create a chart that shows supports that address each identified language. Now that's just a suggestion, but somebody wrote that in there because they think it's a good idea. So I would say to all you, do it. because it's going to help you visualize it as you put it together, and it's going to be helpful for the reader to visualize it as well. So any place in here that it says a suggestion, I would take that as a do, because they wouldn't write it if it wasn't an important idea. So that's true on this page. And then on this page, on page 16, again, they say, after creating such a chart, you could use this chart to write your commentary response from. Again, they're suggesting it, but it's really a very good idea. And then they tell you what to remember at the bottom. So that's something else that you can highlight when you see a suggestion is. So take their suggestions and use them and read it and understand it and apply it, because if they're making those suggestions, you can bet those are in the rubrics that those scorers are going to use as well. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you write your lesson plans, you want to use the CSU Monterey Bay Lesson Plan Template, and it's linked on the agenda. It's also linked on your digital organizer, and it should be familiar to you because hopefully you've used it before. The thing with submitting it to edTPA, the top part of it has your name and all that sort of stuff, but you don't have to submit that. You'll just take that part off. So again, if you click on the one on the agenda, it's just this part. But if you use the one that you've used before, just take that top part off as you go. So this detail is really important. You've done this before. Just follow what you've done before and you'll be great with that. And you got that. Let's see. Then, as you finish your lessons, you want to add that to your edTPA folder on your computer so that you know where those are, right? Because you're going to need to go back to them and put them all into a PDF document at some point for the upload and all that stuff. Any questions about the lesson? All right, so those are all the components of task one. Just kind of the architecture of this whole thing is you want to make a connection between the lesson and prior instruction for students. You want explicit teaching. You want to make it so clear that you're teaching that objective and your students are learning it that anybody could see it. You want to make it very obvious. And as somebody mentioned in the edTPA tips, you want more student talk than teacher talk. You want active engagement, and you want to make that connection to students' practice during the workshop or whatever it is you're doing. And here are some ideas of things to think about. And again, you want to make sure the students know the objectives. You want to repeat it at the end of your lesson so it's really clear that you've achieved that objective and the lesson with the students. So just a quick review, download that lesson template, complete. You're going to, in a minute, we'll talk about this, complete note-taking 2 about task 1. In your edTPA resources for task 1 in the binder, these are all the documents you're going to refer to for task 1. And if you've got them lined out there, you can go back to the slides and you see they're all listed there as well. Any questions on anything that we just covered?